Wheel.com, and over the years I've reviewed a lot of different humidors in all shapes and sizes, but when it comes to traditional desktop humidors like the ones you see in front of me, most of the desktop humidors I have reviewed have been in the $400 to $600 price point, which is basically the upper middle class of desktop humidors. And so for my next review, or as it turns out my next 7 reviews, I wanted to see if there was a cheaper or cheap humidor that actually works that I would recommend. And I specifically started looking to see if I could find a $100 humidor that advertises holding 100 cigars, that was a traditional wooden humidor, so no plastic, that would work. And I quickly realized that probably wasn't going to happen. So I ended up changing those qualifications a little bit and bought 7 humidors that all meet basically 3 requirements. The first is they got to look like a traditional desktop humidor. So there's no plastic, there's no acrylic humidors, there's no converted coolers. They got to be things that you would think of when you think of a humidor. The second is that they need to hold at least 50 Robustos, and not the advertised number. They needed to be capable of legitimately holding it without any humidor Tetris. 50 cigars, normal size cigars, quite easily, of which I think all of these do. And the third was that there was a hard price limit of $175 before tax or shipping. Now, I will point out some of these humidors were bought on sale, but I also think some of these humidors are on sale year-round. So whatever the case is, you should be able to, with a little bit of research, find any of the 7 humidors that are being reviewed as part of the series for less than $175. So I used a random number generator and determined which humidor I would review first, and this was the winner. It's the Savoy Marquis Caramel Elm humidor in medium. We paid $111.95 for this humidor. Now, if you are in the US, Savoy is one of the most popular brands you will see when it comes to humidors, particularly at humidors that are sold by your brick-and-mortar cigar shops, and that is because Savoy is Ashton's line of humidors. And I've had success with Savoy in the past, particularly the Savoy Executive line, which is their higher-end tier of humidors. I think it's one of the best humidors that you can buy for the money. So I was curious to see what the regular Savoy line, which this is part of, what that was like. Now, what's interesting about Savoy is when you go to Ashton's website, you can see that there are 15 different humidors. One of them has a glass top, so I'm not going to say anything about that because I don't really know much. But the other 14 all seem to be basically the same humidors, just in different colors, with basically by what type of wood species they use. Now, the marquee obviously refers to the pattern that's used on the edges of this humidor. But all of the humidors that you see up here, they're all offered in at least 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. Some of the more popular ones are also offered in extra large. Now, the ones that you saw on the screen were all the large versions, and you can tell those because the small and medium ones don't have the keyhole up front. They also don't have a tray included on the inside, so there's just the bottom shelf. But if you bought one of the large, and I presume extra large ones, you do get a tray for the top of it. Now, this humidor is 11 3/4 inches from here to here, 9.5 inches from here to here, and it's 5 inches tall. On the inside, if we're just looking at the bottom area, which is primarily what you're going to use to store cigars, it is 10.75 inches across, 8.45 inches here, and then it's 3.67, so 3 2/3 inches deep. As you can see, the humidor comes with an included hygrometer. It's an analog old school hygrometer. There is a magnet on the back, and you will see right here that it's got a magnetic spot on the lid if I can find it sort of blindly guessing. And there is also the included Savoy humidifier, which I'll get to in a second, and you can see these magnets come pre-installed so that you can easily snap that back into place. Now, that's basically it. The only other thing that comes inside the box is this divider, which goes down here to separate out the cigars in the bottom tray. It's obviously easily removable and easily put back installed. So that's the basics of the humidor. And what I decided to do for all 7 of these humidors was the same 4-step process. So first, the humidor spent 2 weeks in seasoning, and I used a sponge on a plate. Dipped in distilled water, not the plate, the sponge dipped in distilled water. Put that there for a week, opened the humidor back up and re-soaked the sponge with distilled water, closed it again, and then left it there for another week. Once that was done, I then filled up the included humidifier, and the humidor then used a sensor push device, which is this thing. It's a humidity and temperature data logger, so I placed this inside the humidor with the included humidifier filled up and left that alone for 4 weeks without opening it up. After that, I then took the included humidifier out and then put 3 60-gram Boveda packs in here and closed the humidor for 6 weeks. And then after that, I removed the Bovedas and I put them in what you're seeing right now, which is a dry cabinet, which is something that's made for electronics. And I specifically set the dry cabinet to be 36% relative humidity, and this was so that I could control the ambient relative humidity to see how well the humidor sealed, or at least to get some idea of how well they sealed. So, first things first, seasoning, Most of the humidors did perfectly fine in seasoning, and the Savoy was no different. Then we start with the included humidifier test, which is this. Now, Savoy, I will say, does get credit. Of all of the florist foam humidifiers that were used, and most of these humidors came with florist foam humidifiers, and the Savoy Marquis did come with a florist foam humidifier, this was the best version. However, for reasons you're about to see, I don't particularly care for florist foam humidifiers. So if you ever ask someone how you should store your humidor, you will likely hear 70 and 70. 70% relative humidity and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is because of propylene glycol. More specifically, propylene glycol's use in products like this. This is a florist foam humidifier. It is the most common type of included humidification option for humidors. Not just at the low end, it comes in high-end products. It comes in all different shapes and sizes, things like this. And if you open it up, what you will find is this. This is florist foam. As the name implies, it is foam that is used by florists. What florists do is they soak this in water, and then they attach flowers to it, and they can use it to make intricate patterns and designs with the flowers while making sure that the flowers stay watered. It's been used in humidors for decades, and the way that it works, according to the manufacturers, at least most of them, is that you take your product like this, and you put a 1-to-1, a 50-50 ratio of distilled water and propylene glycol, which is sold in cigar shops as humidor solution and all sorts of other names like that. In short, if you see something, a chemical sold in a cigar shop that's labeled for your humidor, it's probably propylene glycol. And the reason behind this is because if you were to just take this and put it in distilled water like the florists do, it would release the water at a way too high of a rate. There would be nothing really restricting the amount of water that gets released. Propylene glycol has a chemical property that allows for it to restrict it, and depending on the ratio of water to propylene glycol, you can actually try to achieve a specific type of relative humidity. The problem is that 50-50, 50% distilled water, 50% propylene glycol, is not going to get anywhere close to 70% relative humidity. There's a third variable, that's the temperature, but the charts that I found from scientists, and this is way above my head, none of them got close to a temperature that made it so that you could have it at 50-50 and get to 70% relative humidity. Even if you got down to 20 degrees, it still wasn't close. And what you actually need is something that's probably closer to 2/3 propylene glycol to 1/3 distilled water to get to 70% relative humidity. And I might even go beyond that. I might even take it to maybe 80% propylene glycol to 20% distilled water. But I would just use something that wasn't invented in 1954, and the reasons behind that are these products are terribly frustrating. You will oftentimes end up with them putting out way too much moisture because there's just not really a great way to unless you're going to weigh out the propylene glycol to distilled water every time to get the 2/3 to 1/3, it's going to be a challenge. And there are problems to that. So if you over-humidify your cigars, at the very least, it probably will affect the flavor, and maybe it makes them better, but probably not. It likely will cause burn issues. Over-humidified cigars tend to not want to stay lit as well. That's why you'll hear people talk about dry boxing cigars if you have burn issues with cigars. And in the worst of instances, you run the risk of mold. So this is a florist foam humidifier that was filled with a 50-50 ratio. And as you can see, there's now mold growing on the outside of the humidifier. And obviously, if there's mold growing there, that means that there's mold floating around your humidor, which will eventually get onto your cigars and cause you all sorts of problems. So the short of this is, don't use something that was invented in 1954 to humidify your cigar. So in the case of the Savoy, the problems were that after it was seasoned, once the 50-50 mixture went in here, it then just kept adding to the humidity. So you can see the chart that's on the screen right now, and what you will see is that even after seasoning was done, the humidity just kept skyrocketing or increasing at a pretty stable clip. Now what you'll see is that once the Bovedas went in, they then spent the first 48 hours, the first sort of linear line that you see right there, where it's basically just at a flat 180-degree angle. That is the Bovedas trying in the first day to absorb the excess humidity. And then after 48 hours, it began to dip below 75%. And then you can see eventually the Bovedas got to a point where it was right around the 69% that the Bovedas were set at. So then the Savoy Marquis went into the dry cabinet. And I don't really know what to make of when it comes to this data. There are a few problems. The first is that the Savoy is one of only 3 humidors that have gone through the dry cabinet testing so far, so not a lot of comparison points. And it's also the only one that's gone in at over 65% relative humidity, meaning that it had way more humidity to lose in the 36% relative humidity dry cabinet. The second issue is that this is all irrelevant because I can look at this humidor and tell you that it doesn't seal, and all you need to do is turn it to the sides and look in this area or on this side, in this area, and as you can see on the screen right now, there is a visible gap that is big enough to the point where I can see, without much effort, the gold-plated hinge mechanism for the lid, which means that no matter how well you work out the humidifier issues, this is always going to be leaking air from the outside and then leaking that humidified air back out into the room. which makes this all kind of irrelevant and makes the recommendation for this humidor very easy. The answer is no. I do not know if this is an issue that Ashton has on a widespread basis with Savoy humidors. My guess is probably not, because Ashton sells a lot of humidors, and if they sold a lot of humidors that looked like this, they probably wouldn't sell a lot of humidors, or at least not for very long. What I can do is recommend that you buy your humidors in person, because if I had gone to a retail store, I would have asked them to take this humidor out of the box. I would have inspected it. I would have seen if there were scratches on here. I would have seen if there were any chips or dents, and I also would have checked the seal just to make sure that there wasn't anything visibly off in the store before I brought it home, seasoned it, and then tried to put cigars in here, only to realize that it was never going to work from the start. But if you are watching this on YouTube and you are unaware of what Half Wheel is, I would recommend that you check out halfwheel.com. That is our day job. The YouTube channel is something we do basically once a week, if that, mainly for cigar accessories. But if you want to learn more about cigars, particularly what's happening in the cigar world, if you want to read cigar reviews, we publish those pretty much daily at halfwheel.com.